Шановні колеги, ми продовжуємо роботу.
So, dear colleagues, we shall continue our press briefings with a weekly update from the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission Principal Deputy Chief Monitor, Mr. Alexander Hook.
Good afternoon, dear friends. It has been another week of violence in the Donbass. 14,698. That's the number of times the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine last week recorded violation of the ceasefire agreement. 14,698. That's the number of times the sides fired rounds from tanks, artillery, mortars, and other weapons. 14,698. That's the number of times the lives and livelihoods of Ukrainians on both sides of the contact line were endangered in that week. After almost 2.5 years of ceasefire, or rather, after almost 2.5 years of violation of the same ceasefire agreement, none of this comes as a surprise. We have all become immune to the disregard shown by the sides to the agreements they have signed. Last week was just another demonstration of this disregard. Looking at the statistics, it is clear that last week was calmer than the week before. There was, as this graph here demonstrates, a decrease in the number of ceasefire violations compared to the previous week, by some 15%, in fact. And in terms of the number of explosions attributable to Minsk proscribed weapons, namely tanks, mortar, and artillery, including multiple launch rocket systems, last week saw similar developments. As this graph shows here, the number of such explosions actually dropped by 60%. 911 of such explosions were recorded this week compared to 2,238 the previous week. I, like everyone else, want to draw positive conclusions from such statistics. I want to see a downward trend. I want to see the end to this conflict. The reality, however, is that there is no end in sight so long as the sides maintain weapons inside the security zone. Sometimes we see a lessening in the violence. Sometimes it's for political reasons. Sometimes it's for humanitarian reasons. Remember, we even saw a complete cessation of violence for one day at the start of the new school year in September last year. But every time there is a dip in the level of violence, it is followed by a resurgence. Every time our hopes are raised, they are dashed as the sides resume the shelling. Every time people in Donbass think it is safe to resume a normal life, shells come raining down on them and their homes. And while we saw a decrease in the number of ceasefire violations last week, we also saw the reasons why hope is short-lived. We saw why 1 week's relatively positive development is unavoidably reversed the following week. We saw why this violence continues. On Friday last week, our monitor spotted 3 self-propelled artillery pieces in violation of agreed withdrawal lines in so-called DPR-controlled Chrestatitske. This village is 9 kilometers from the contact line. These weapons here should have been withdrawn. Picture, please, again. These weapons here, these 3 artillery pieces here, should have been withdrawn at least 25 kilometers from the contact line. They are 9 kilometers to the contact line now here. This Tuesday, in government-controlled Viskriva, One of our unmanned aerial vehicles spotted a towed howitzers 10 kilometers from the contact line. This too was in violation of agreed withdrawal lines. It should have been at least 25 kilometers from the contact line. Dear friends, we in the OSCE SMM have consistently advocated for the withdrawal of weapons combined with disengagement of forces and formations. And on paper at least, many others agree with us. But after 2.5 years, it is obvious that not everyone agrees. We in the SMM cannot force people to think or act differently. We, after all, an unarmed civilian monitoring mission tasked to monitor, collect and publicly report facts and facilitate dialogue we are. None of those artillery pieces we have seen before here belongs to the OSCE SMM. But I'm still hopeful that there are many people on both sides who genuinely want to end this violence. We in the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission stand ready to facilitate this and the wider process necessary to bring about a permanent cessation of violence. In the meantime, however, there must be an acceptance by all that the needs of the civilian population must take priority. Many of the weapons we observe are positioned in and around residential areas. Unavoidably, outgoing fire is met by incoming fire, and civilians are caught in the middle. Last week, we in fact confirmed 8 cases of civilians injured in shelling incidents on both sides of the contact line. On 9 March, in government-controlled Pokrovsk, formerly Krasnoarmysk, for example, our monitors met a man who had sustained shrapnel injuries to his head near his home in government-controlled Avdiivka. We also spoke to medical personnel in so-called DPR-controlled Novoazovsk, who said they had treated a young man who had sustained shrapnel injuries on 6 March in shelling in so-called DPR-controlled Pikuzi. The sides must also minimize the risk to the very young. Last week, a grenade took the life of a 12-year-old boy in government-controlled Vuhledar. In addition, the sites must ensure that there is safe access for civilians crossing the contact line. Thousands of them do so every day. These people must not be allowed to fall victim to current political pressure. The needs of a grandmother seeking medical assistance in another part in her own country cannot become the focus of such politics. Such grandmothers and thousands of others like her, in fact, need greater access, not less. More entry-exit checkpoints need to be opened, in particular in the Luhansk region, where there is only one crossing route, and even there it is only available to pedestrians. Opening hours of entry-exit checkpoints must be extended, preferably on a 24/7 basis. More than anything, these people deserve to have safe, secure access across the contact line. With personnel and hardware present, these choke points, with thousands of civilians vulnerable in the open, are unavoidably the focus of violence. There can be no meaningful security for these people unless forces and formations disengage from these areas. Dear friends, with patience running low and anger running high, and with spring almost upon us, we can no longer assume anything. With weapons present and forces and formations in close proximity, Donbas is a tinderbox. Steps need to be taken to reduce tension. Too many measures are in place that serve to increase tension. we reiterate what we have called for before. The sites must withdraw all heavy weapons from the contact line behind agreed withdrawal lines and disengage where positions are too close. The guns must fall silent. All of this must be done now. There can be no more excuses. As usual, at the end of this statement, I would like to inform you about the latest mission numbers. As of today, the mission has 725 monitors, of whom 613 are deployed to the east. In addition, there are 334 Ukrainian colleagues, as well as another 93 other international staff working for the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hook. We have at least one question. It will be asked in Ukrainian.
Question from Crimea News. Yesterday, your mandate was extended for another year. Could you comment in more detail whether it will allow, whether there were a discussion about the physical access to non-government controlled border areas, whether it is possible to open your forward patrol bases at the border, and the technical capacity of your mission? Can you comment on that, new developments in this regard?
I can confirm indeed our mandate had been extended by consensus decision of all 57 participating states of the OSCE. This is a clear political will by all participating states, including Ukraine and the Russian Federation, to continue the operations of the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission. The mandate originally adopted in March 2014 has been herewith extended in the same shape and with the same content. The sites at this stage allow us access to some degree during daylight in some areas at the contact line. Should the Joint Center for Control and Coordination and the sites agree to further access, the SMM will do so. Thank you.
One more question.
Телеканал Україна.
Ukraine TV channel. Mr. Hook, could you tell why SMM monitors are not spending nights over the contact line? They have the permission to do that.
OSCE Special Monitoring Mission's mandate foresees that, as necessary, the SMM can work 24/7. The Joint Center for Control and Coordination and the sites have thus far managed to enable us to work during daytime, not everywhere. It is up to them to enable us to do that also during nighttime. Thank you.
Колеги, чи є ще запитання? We don't have further questions at this point. The press conference is finished. Thank you for coming and looking forward to seeing you here next week. Шановні колеги, наступна подія рівно о 14-й.